Pretty much every democracy on the planet is filled with all kinds of social diversity. But here's the thing. While a lot of our differences are just part of life, some can create some really deep, painful divisions and, well, very real inequalities.
And that brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. When do those differences cross the line and become political? What happens when our identities, who we are, what we believe, where we come from, step into the public arena?
So to really dig into this, we're going to look at three major social divisions in India: gender, religion, and caste. And we're going to see how politics can sometimes reinforce those old inequalities, but also, and this is the really fascinating part, how it can become a powerful tool to fight back against them.
First up, let's talk about gender. This is a division that often starts at home, in the so-called private sphere. But as we're about to see, it has massive, absolutely massive consequences for who actually holds power out in the public world. Okay, so this all really kicks off with something called the sexual division of labor. It's this widespread idea that women handle all the housework and childcare, while men are the ones who go out and work for a wage. And here is the absolute key. This has nothing to do with biology. It's a social stereotype. And it leads to a huge problem, because a lot of women's work ends up being unpaid, undervalued, and basically invisible.
And the system that holds all this up? Well, that's what we call patriarchy, a society where men hold most of the power. In India, this isn't some abstract academic idea. It creates very real, everyday disadvantages for women. And the data? Well, the data makes that crystal clear.
All right, let's just look at the hard data here. When we talk about literacy rates, you see 76% for men, but only 54% for women. That's not just a number on a chart. That is a massive gap in access to education, which is one of the most basic tools for anyone to get ahead in life.
And this inequality, it translates directly into political power. Or, I should say, a lack of it. Back in 2014, women made up less than 12% of India's national parliament. And if you look at the state level, it was even worse, less than 5%. Think about it. When half the population has such a tiny, tiny fraction of the political power, their issues and priorities just aren't going to get the attention they deserve.
But here's the thing. It's not a static picture. Things are changing. Through a ton of political organizing and activism, a huge step forward was taken. Now, 1/3 of all seats in local governments are reserved specifically for women. That has brought more than 1 million women into elected office. It's powerful proof that when these social divisions become a political fight, real, tangible change can actually happen.
Okay, so that's the story with gender. Now let's pivot to another huge social division, religion. And unlike gender, which can sometimes be pushed aside as a private issue, religious differences almost always play out in the political arena. And that's where things can get, well, very complicated.
This character here is asking a really great question. If you're not super religious yourself, why should you even care about these big words like communalism or secularism? And the answer is because these ideas end up shaping the very foundation of the country and can affect absolutely everyone, no matter what their personal beliefs are.
So the real problem we're talking about here is something called communalism. This is what happens when politics starts to see religion as the main basis of the nation. It basically turns one religious group against another, and ultimately it becomes a fight to use the power of the government to enforce one group's dominance over everyone else.
And this slide just lays out the two opposing ideas so clearly. On one hand, you have communalism, which builds politics entirely on religious division. But on the other hand, the very foundation of the Indian state is secularism, which says, nope, there is no official state religion here. All faiths get treated with equal respect.
Now, communalism doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It's a process. It escalates. It can start with just everyday prejudices and stereotypes that we all hear, but then it can grow into a real quest for political dominance for one's own community, and that can lead to political mobilization using sacred symbols and religious leaders to really stir up emotions. And in its absolute ugliest form, it can explode into communal violence and riots.
All right, let's move on to our final social division. And this one is really deeply woven into the fabric of Indian society: caste. Its role in politics is incredibly complex. It's a history of profound inequality, but also, as we're about to see, it has created a surprising path toward empowerment.
See, unlike some other social divisions, the caste system is, by its very nature, a rigid hierarchy. And that hierarchy isn't just a social thing. For centuries, it has created deep, lasting economic gaps between different groups.
And wow, does the data show it. Just take a look at these poverty rates in rural India. For Hindu upper castes, it's under 12%. But for scheduled castes, it jumps to nearly 36%. And for scheduled tribes, it's a staggering 46%. I mean, the economic disparity is just undeniable, and it's a direct legacy of the caste system.
Okay, so how does all of this actually show up in politics? Well, for one, parties and candidates often appeal directly to caste loyalties to get votes. Some parties are even basically seen as representatives of specific caste communities. But, and this is the other side of the coin, the democratic principle of one person, one vote has also given incredible power to castes that were historically oppressed, giving them a new political voice and a way to demand change.
So, we've walked through gender, religion, and caste. And it all kind of boils down to this central dilemma for any democracy. Can bringing these deep, often painful social divisions into the political spotlight actually be a good thing?
And the answer, well, it might actually surprise you. As this quote points out, the political expression of these differences isn't just something that's possible, sometimes it can be downright desirable. Because a democracy that just pretends these divisions don't exist isn't a healthy democracy at all.
And here's the really crucial reason why. When these divisions enter the political conversation, it gives a voice to communities that have been marginalized and disadvantaged for a long, long time. It allows them to organize, to demand their fair share of power, and to fight back against historical injustice. Yeah, it's messy and it's often full of conflict, but it's a vital tool for actually achieving a more equal society.
Which leaves us wrestling with this final, really tricky thought. In order to fix an injustice, you first have to name it, right? You have to call it out. But in the process of doing that, do you risk making that very division even stronger? That is the fundamental challenge that sits right at the heart of identity, power, and politics in any democracy.